I'm especially interested in being at this conference because as an academic since the 1970s and as a professional consultant who's done a great deal of work in internal communication and other areas of PR and organizational over the years, it's interesting to see the combination of the two coming together at this conference. And this particular presentation that I'm making I will mention the name of the organization to you orally, but I can't put it into the publication of the documents as they're distributed through the web at the moment because I did not have time to get permission of the organization. It's quite a large bureaucratic process in the government to get permission to publish something or to distribute it in a written form. So therefore, I'll mention the name of the organization. It is the Auditor General of Canada that I did the study for. And my daughter also cooperated with me on that. That was Alexandra Hendricks. This particular study was done in 2003. And it was, just one moment, it pertained to the power failure that took place. It was one of the most extensive power failures that had taken place to that point in time in the United States and Canada. And the power failure affected areas of the US, Northeast and Midwest, also Ontario and Quebec. And Ottawa, the seat of the Canadian government, is in Ottawa. So you can imagine the kind of havoc that was wreaked in places like Ottawa, as well as in New York City, where the power failure occurred at rush hour, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We had a total population of about 55 million. The figures vary from point to point when you look at the readings on the failure. But it also, there were about 13 million in New York City who were affected by the power outage. So you had many different infrastructures affected by it. You had transportation, water, communication, governance, industry, etc. And in particular, the organization that I did the study for was very affected by it in terms of its employees. And so what you had happening was that the Canadian government operations were severely interrupted to the point that they virtually came to a halt in many government departments. Now, that can be a very dangerous situation and can generate many sub-crises. As often happens in crisis situations, you have a major crisis and then you have many, many spin-off crises. And when it comes to governance, that's one such situation. So you had many federal buildings closed between August 15th and the 22nd. And many employees, in terms of the employee communication, that's what I'm focusing on in this presentation, because we were asked to look immediately after the crisis. We were asked by the Auditor General to conduct a survey of their employees to find out what had happened, what the failures were in that situation, why there was such a communication void. And so we sought to answer the question, how effective was the emergency communication system between August 14th and August 22nd, when things pretty much got back to normal? So we had a naturalistic setting, an actual crisis that we were dealing with. We surveyed all Ottawa-based agency employees by means of an email link that was sent out by the head of communications. We obtained responses from 209 out of 600 employees. And the responses were registered between September 1st and September 15th. So we were looking at more specific questions also, such as how did employees acquire and share information? What problems did they experience? How would they have preferred to acquire and share information? And what improvements could be made to existing systems of information dissemination? I'm not going to say very much about these, the various charts. I'm just going to run through them for your information. Because it's relevant in that people such as the executives and directors were able to get back to functioning much more quickly than the other employees were able to do. So this is number of years work for the agency, and as we later found out in the results, the number of years did not make much difference in terms of people knowing how to operate in the situation. So the work situation during the crisis then, we were looking at how employees learn, patterns of communication, and preferences regarding emergency communication. So we were looking at Day by day, we were asking, could you please indicate the situation in which you found yourself for most of the day? And you can see if you look at the unable to work column there, that very large numbers of employees were not able to work. 58.9 were unable to work on the first day, and it had only reduced by the last day to 32.7. The percent of employees not on leave who indicated that they were unable to work each day by office location, there were 3 office locations, and one was more strongly affected than others were. These were percent of employees who indicated they were unable to work by each day. So we look next at the first sources of information for employees, and you can see if you look at this particular slide, just one second. You can see that a number of the employees, 11.6% of them, went to the office trying to find out what to do. The largest percentage, 59.3%, relied on the media for their sources, and as we found out, there were many, many problems with reliance on the media. Later sources of information, you can see if you look at the largest figures there, 64.1% called the agency emergency telephone number, which was not functioning in the first days of the crisis. 56.9% got their information from media reports, and then 33% called the agency's reception number. So you can see that there was an effort, if you looked at the whole chart, to obtain from many different sources. There was no one coherent way that people were operating in the situation. And in terms of awareness of the agency emergency number, if you look, you see how few people knew the emergency number on the first day of the crisis. So a definite gap there in terms of planning. And at the 2 minutes, okay. Percent of employees, respondents who knew the emergency number at the time of the power outage by office location and by years work for the agency. And this one is interesting because you can see that those who had been there for 10 years, barely, 20%, only 20% of them knew the number. 16.7% of those who had worked for 1 year knew the number. So the knowledge did not increase over time. Problems identified, I have a number of different points in the paper, and I don't really have time today to discuss them with you, but some of the most interesting information actually came out in the results in terms of the various problems that were identified. 1 out of 4 employees, for example, indicated they had received unreliable information, and there were ambiguities such as that inhibited reception. An example, which is interesting because people often use terms like essential services and non-essential services. So they put out reports saying, if you work in essential services, go to the office. If you don't work in essential services, don't go. Well, employees didn't know, am I essential or am I not essential? So also words like may, could, or we encourage you to do something. Employees didn't know how to operate in that situation. There were inconsistencies between messages on the main agency reception, the voicemail, government numbers, the media, Treasury Board, to which most employees in government go to the Treasury Board website. But they didn't know if they were to go to the Treasury Board website or not because they're a quasi-government agency. The Auditor General is a watchdog for the rest of government. So therefore, they don't always operate by Treasury Board rules. So many different problems like that. Am I out of time yet? 13 seconds, okay. Personal networks of information. You can see that if they received emails or phone calls, you can see 39.7% got the emails from communications. Okay, I must quit there. So I do have a paper though, so if you're interested in more specific results. Thank you.